Trip here, and I wanted to talk a little bit today about some preseason bow prep. I was outside shooting and I thought it was a good time to discuss the 3 easy steps that I follow to make sure that my archery equipment is ready to roll when opening day of bow season here in Ohio begins. We're about 6 weeks away, so plenty of time to get started. I've been shooting all summer. But really want to make sure I put the finishing touches on things so that my equipment is ready to go on opening day. This video is primarily going to be about maintenance and prep work to get that bow ready for the season. I'm not going to get into how to sight in your bow, how to tune your bow or check your timing or anything like that. All I'm really concerned about today is that preventative maintenance to get your bow ready for the upcoming season. So first we want to talk about is the limbs. So one of the things that I will do is I will inspect the limbs visually. So give it a quick look on both surfaces. Make sure I see that there aren't any obvious cracks or splinters. And then usually by running my finger along the surface of the limb, this will allow me to feel if there are any abnormalities there in the limb. Usually try to do that on both the inside and the outside of the limbs, and everything's good to go. One of the other things that I recommend to people is to check all of the screws and bolts that are on your bow. Depending on how many accessories you have mounted to your bow, there can be a high number of screws on the bow. If you look at the cams, the modules, there's a couple screws on each of the cams that, depending on the bow that you're shooting, there's screws down here for the cams and for the draw stops. They can work loose. The stabilizer, the bolts on your rest can work loose. So there's all kinds of, I think on this particular bow, counting all of the bolts and screws that are on the sights, I think I have somewhere around 55 different screws and bolts that are on this bow. So really it's not a question of if they will break loose, it's a question of when they will break loose. So I usually, to give a first preliminary check, is I like to hold the bow and kind of tap on it. And if I don't hear anything rattle, then usually everything's okay. One of the other things that I do is I'll look and check and visually kind of tug and push on the different accessories, make sure the stabilizer's tight, and just kind of give it a quick look, tap the cams a little bit. If I don't hear any rattle, then I know everything's okay. Now, if anything does come loose on your sights, on your rest, any of the mods on the cam, if it's down the cam and make a rattling noise, which can be annoying, and in the bow hunting world we're always trying to keep everything in our system quiet, so we don't want that. But if your sights move, if bolts on your sights break loose and your sights move or your rests move, that can cause your accuracy to suffer, and that can be problematic. One of the things that I do to make sure that nothing has moved, especially on an accessory that only has one bolt attaching it to the bow, is I will take a pencil and I will outline the surfaces that come in contact with the riser of the bow. So if I notice something has changed, my point of impact has changed, say I'm hitting lower than when I sighted the bow in, I can take a quick look at the rest and I can see where if the rest has moved from those original marks that I put on the bow. One of the next things I want to talk about is the string and or the cables on the bow. Now I get a lot of questions about how often should people replace their bowstring or the cables, and I really don't think that there is a cut and dry time frame. A lot of people will say you should do it every year. I have found that it's all going to depend on the wear and tear on the string and the cables. If you shoot a lot, and I'm talking about hundreds of arrows a week, then you should probably replace the strings and cables with regularity. If you only shoot 10, 15, 20 arrows a week, then you could probably get a little bit more time out of your strings and your cables. The analogy I use is, changing the oil in your vehicle. They tell you every 3 months or 3,000 miles. So if you don't drive your vehicle that much, and in 3 months you've only driven 1,000 miles, you could probably go a little longer before you change that oil. Is it bad to change your oil at 1,000 miles after 3 months? Of course not. That's fine, but is it necessary? Probably not. So just keep an eye on your string and your cables and replace them as needed. One of the other things that I get questions about is waxing the string. Again, it's going to come down with wear and tear. What I tell people to look for are the small microfibers. If you see little pieces of string, the string hits that fuzzy look, then it definitely could use some wax. If it gets too bad, then it's gonna need to be replaced. So let's talk about string waxing. What I mean by fuzzy is if it has the small microfibers of the string start to peel away and the string actually has a fuzzy look, then it definitely needs to be waxed. And earlier I was discussing if the string looks fuzzy, it probably will need some wax. Here is a bow that a friend of my son brought in, and he wanted me to build him a new string. And this is kind of an extreme example of what I'm talking about. I'll hold this behind so we can kind of get it to focus and you can see what I'm talking about. This string is very fuzzy and is probably more towards the area of needing replaced. So there's an example of what I mean by fuzzy. So the important thing to remember is to only wax the areas where the strands of the string are exposed. Don't wax anywhere that they're serving over the string. Anywhere the string or cables are going to track in the cam, don't wax those areas. It will speed up serving separation, and wax will collect a lot of junk, dust, and dirt, and it'll get in the tracks and it will wear out the string and the serving even faster. Other areas that I don't wax are on the surfaces that slide in your cable slide or in your roller guide. I don't wax those areas. I prefer to lube those areas with a string lube. So the other thing you want to do is shoot your bow. You want to become familiar with that bow so that you're comfortable with it and you're confident with it. To use another vehicle analogy, when you buy a new car or a new truck, you get in and you're probably unfamiliar with the controls of all the gadgets. The more time you spend behind the wheel, the more familiar you become with that vehicle. Same thing goes with your bow. The more time you spend behind the riser, the more comfortable you are with that bow and the more familiar you are with that bow. And if something does move or something does go wrong with the bow, you'll be more apt to figure that out in a timely fashion than assuming it's something that you're doing. So get out there, shoot that bow, and make sure that you practice enough to guarantee that you are as lethal and as proficient with your weapon as you can be. We owe it to the game to be that way. So hopefully this video will help you bag that big buck this season. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the deer woods.